Hello, welcome back to a Saturday stream on Tech Ambrosia. I hope everybody's doing well. I hope the week is treating you well, and I hope your weekend is going similarly well. How's everybody doing out there? Staying warm, I hope. It is getting to that part of the year, right? I was just out trying to take some pictures this morning because I'm trying to do a camera challenge on Mastodon, and turns out my working hours are pretty much exactly from sunup to sundown. So getting outside to actually take pictures is kind of a challenge, more of a challenge than I think it was supposed to be uh, for this challenge for this month. But having a good one. Awesome. All right, we got folks in the chat. How's everybody doing? Samsung Simp is here. Hello, welcome to the stream. Jack68K is here. Hello, welcome to the stream. Efreet05 is here. Welcome to the stream. That's right, Bulldozer Hype. Gutbomb's here, and Gutbomb is not late. Hello, welcome. Charlotte is here. Charlotte says I'm ready to get bulldozed. Oh, believe me. Subnet is here. Hello, welcome to the stream. Hardenheld is here as well. Hello, welcome. Nice, excellent. Efreet has been testing and practicing with their new Hecko FR301. Is that the full soldering station, or is that a desoldering or a hot air station? Which Hecko is that one? I don't know their model numbers by heart. Oh, there you go. Efreet says big brain moment. Bought it from Japan because the yen is weak at the moment. For 180 bucks, not bad. It is a desoldering station. Very nice. Yeah. You typed yes, and I said Zen because I have CPU cores on the brain right now. So between the two of us, we got it completely wrong. Gutbomb says I had an 8350 because I like pain. Guess what, Gutbomb? The first CPU we're looking at today is an 8120, so it's even more painful. Even lower clocks. Oh, so about that, what are we doing today? So honestly, this stream, this was going to be a video, and I realized that, my track record on making videos is pretty poor right now, thanks to the unmedicated ADHD. So I figured, well, just throw it into a stream, and we'll just do it live, as they say in the biz, when they're hopped up on who knows what. But yeah, we'll take a look at this. I have, right here. It is right here. I have a chip I didn't know existed, and in fact, if you look it up on Wikipedia right now, you go to the Wikipedia page for AMD FX processors, and you scroll down to the Bulldozer and pile driver sections. This chip doesn't exist. This is the FX 8200. Will it focus? Of course it won't focus. Why would it focus? There we go. The FX 82, or sorry, FX 8200, FX 4200. For all of my life, right, FX launched in 2011. Just to refocus. This camera's been misbehaving lately. Bulldozer launched in 2011, right? And for all of my life, all the time I've known it, the whole spiel with Bulldozer was you get a module, right? That's a floating point unit, a very high bandwidth floating point unit. Don't worry, it's definitely not going to bottleneck under a lot of load. And you get 2 integer units, and that module, 2 integer units and a floating point unit, is 2 cores, right? According to AMD, or it was. Trust us, it's 2 cores. But that's how I thought, that's just the way that a Bulldozer, a piece of Bulldozer is made, right? You put in 2 modules, you get 4 cores, right? And we've looked at a bunch of 4-core bulldozers on this channel, mostly in APU form, right? But there were discrete, regular desktop bulldozer chips with no integrated graphics and with level 3 cache, because that's what gets axed when you put integrated graphics on the APUs is the level 3 cache that are 2 module 4 thread 4-core bulldozers. Now the thing about this, and this came up from a conversation that I had in the Pixel Pipes Discord, just in one of the channels, because we had looked at some. I think I was making fun of Bulldozer at some point, and someone asked sincerely, like, these are always 2 threads per module, right? Like it's always 1 module, 2 cores. And I'm like, yeah, I think so, because that was my understanding. If that was the AMD tech brief at the time, 1 module, 2 cores. Now we know it as 1 physical core, 2 logical cores. This one isn't, or it might not be. I haven't tested it yet, and that's what we're going to do today. So, if you know about how microprocessors are made in bulk nowadays, modern processes, right? You would think you'd take a larger chip design, say an 8-core Bulldozer, say an 8000 series, which is 4 modules, 8 threads. That's the full Bulldozer die, right? Like that's the 4 module, 8 threads. If some of those don't work, some of those modules are defective, or like there's a spec got on the silicon or whatever, some of it doesn't work, maybe some vias in line up, I don't know, whatever. There's a defect on the silicon. You can just lance off one of those modules, and hey presto, you have a 3 module, 6-core Bulldozer, right? Like that's how these things work. One of the cores doesn't work, you just kill it off, sell it as a cheaper product. This apparently, the only way I can figure this actually works is this is an 8-core Bulldozer where instead of lancing off, or fusing off 2 modules, they've fused off 4 threads. So there's 4 modules, 4 threads, supposedly. They apparently did this a couple of times. I think the 4150, the FX 4150 was similar, but I couldn't find one of those to save my life. But the 4200 supposedly is also built this way. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to get one and try it. And I did. And I have not tested this yet. I really hope it works. I've updated the BIOS on the board that we're using on the test bench here. Hopefully it will be supported. I think it will. It's the final BIOS for the board. It's from 2016. These FX 4200s, from what I understand, came out in 2012. I believe they are pile driver, so they're 2nd generation Bulldozer, which is fine. It should be fine. It should be very interesting. So normally, when you have one of these discrete 4-core Bulldozer chips, right, you have 2 modules, 4 threads. So you have 2 floating point units and 4 integer units. And you've got half the level 3 cache, so 4 megs instead of 8 megs. Supposedly, this thing has all 4 of its floating point units intact, but there's only 1 integer unit per floating point unit. So it's like 4 actual cores, like you'd find on an Intel processor of the time. And it has all 8 megs of its level 3 cache, supposedly. Again, haven't tried it yet. We're going to test it live. As comparison, last night, I went through this test machine with my FX 6300, which is a 3 module, 6 thread, right? So a 6-core Bulldozer. I ran a couple of games, ran some benchmarks, recorded my results, and we'll see how it compares. The other CPU I wanted to compare it with, of course, was a full 8-core Bulldozer, right? Where you have 4 modules and all the integer units are still activated. So in there right now is an 8120, is an FX 8120. they're like 20 bucks nowadays. Man, they held their value for a long time. I don't know how, but like through Zen 1, Zen Plus, and even through a little bit of Zen 2, 8-core FX CPUs were still kind of expensive. They have thankfully dropped in price these days, which is good because they're not worth the silicon they're made out of. But we'll see that in a minute. So what I want to do is I want to go through and run some games and get some benchmark results on this actual 8-core, and then we'll put the 4200 in and see. I'm expecting it to land in between the 6300 and the 8120 instead of, being slower. Clock speeds here are basically the same. The 8120 and the 4200 have the same base and boost clock speeds, and the 6300 is only up by about 100 megahertz on both. So they're not exactly like, we're not looking at barnstorming performance here. 4.1 gigahertz on the boost clock for the 6300. Whew. And an even 4 on the 4200 and the 8120. So not super fast here. Anyway, let's look at the machine. While I'm switching over here, we'll say hi to folks who've dropped into chat. And if Freet asks, the 4200 is an OEM part. I'm not sure. I don't really know a lot about it. Like I said, if you go on the Wikipedia page for FX processors, this isn't there. It's not on there. I only learned about it because Passmark, right? We did Passmark last year for the Cheap PC Challenge, where you download the old version of Passmark and run it for points. They keep a database of everything that gets tested through their program, right? So you can upload your results. And there's like 50 some FX 4200s in their database, and it lists it as 4 modules and 4 threads, instead of most of the 4000 series FX processors, which are 2 modules, 4 threads. I don't know anything about this chip. It's like a ghost chip. Hopefully not as spicy as a ghost pepper. Who else do we got in here? Gutbomb continued his story in an 8350 because he liked pain, and he returned it and got a 6600K instead, which is a much better choice. Much better choice. 1bit is here. Hello, welcome. 1bit says Amber covers every topic and gear I didn't have money for back then. I never wanted anything to do with FX. Honestly, these days I run FX mostly to dunk on it. I'm always surprised when I first start up an FX machine to like get it ready for stream, because it's like, oh yeah, it's pretty snappy actually. And then like I'll have to like install DirectX or something, right? Like I'll need to get the DirectX 9 libraries in there for something, and it'll just sit there, and all the CPU cores will peg up to 100%, and I just gotta go make some dinner because it's just gonna be sitting there for an hour or two doing who knows what while it tries to install things that my Ryzen 5800 takes 0 seconds to complete. Oh, Efreet says, I wish CPU World's wiki still worked. Yeah, apparently they were having some scraping problems. I don't know from where or from whom, but it would be nice if it came back. CPU World is pretty nice, pretty reasonable resource. I found a little information on, I think Tech PowerUp has like some CPU resources. Not a lot, but they have some, along with their GPU resources, obviously. I don't remember if they list this one, though. What else do we have here? Wonderful, wonderful, Gutbomb. Gutbomb printed a Mistletoad. If you haven't seen the Mistletoad STL going around, there is someone modeled a little plastic toad with a big like ICBM strapped to its back, and you can print it out in your 3D printer. And Gutbomb did that, and it's hilarious. Thank you, Gutbomb. David Starbucks, as I look over at my FX 8350 HD 7970 GHz edition doorstop. Yeah, pretty much. You probably still do some stuff with that 7970. Put it with a, pair it with a real CPU. Shots fired. Ah. Samsung Sim says un-FX is your FX. No. Oh my gosh. Gotham says I just checked my Amazon order. I bought the 8350 originally for $160. $160. Get paid $20 for this 8120, and I think it's still overpriced. It's like the pile of Pentium 4s that I have that I didn't pay more than $5 a piece for. They're still overpriced at that. Oh, Hardened Held is here. Hardened Held says AMD had ideas. They weren't always good ideas, but they were ideas. Oh, yeah, no kidding. No kidding. The FX, I don't understand. They trounced Intel for years with a CPU architecture that was faster per clock, right? Like K8 and K10 just started out just kicking, Pentium 4's butt, and then when Core 2 came out, they managed to get the clock speed up. It took them a little while, but they managed to get the clock speed up and stay competitive with Core 2, with K10, especially with the Phenom 2 generation. And then they were like, what we should do? We should do our own Pentium 4. It'll be different this time. It'll work for us. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Oh, Intel hit the end of Denard scaling, but we won't. We'll be able to get over 6 gigahertz. It's fine. Oh. Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. David Starbucks says, thank the universe Ryzen came to be. Or we'd all still be running 4-core, 8-thread i7s. For real. For real. Intel really didn't want to sell us anything else, did they? Clarja One Plus is here. Hello, welcome to the stream. Trina's Technobabble is also here. Hello, Trina. Welcome. Timo is here. Timo says, I watch to change Core Duo to quad CPU. 50, 60 euro max, if not look extreme. If you're playing vintage games of the Core 2's vintage, honestly, the Core 2 quad is excessive. I used a Core 2 Duo for a long time as my gaming PC. Never missed the other 2 cores. Everything I ran on it ran great. I had a Wolfdale, so I had the extra level 3 cache, but 3.33 gigahertz, the E8600, loved that thing. Loved it. Never missed having, 2 more cores. Nothing I played used them. It was great. David Starbuck is still streaming Memtest in Trina's honor. Oh gosh. Oh, that's unfortunate. Core 2 Duo motherboard I have can't handle 1333 frontside bus. That's unfortunate. Yeah, Samsung Sim says Wolfdale. Yeah, Wolfdale is great. Wolfdale is a really good architecture. I like that a lot. All right. Yeah, for real. Johnny Chang says the Scion from the Alpha architecture was the Athlon. Truly. What a score, right? AMD scoops up those engineers from DEC and they build the Athlon. What a score. What a score. Oh, Claudia One Plus with a super chat. It said there's no wrong way to consume a piece of media, but if that's true, then why did they make the Nintendo Switch cartridges taste bad? Mods ban this twink. Oh, I love it and I hate it. All right, so there's our FX 4200. It's going to be hanging out here for a bit. We're going to test this 8120, see what kind of results we get. Write them down so I don't forget, because I will. Oh. Yeah. There was, Dr. Goldfield Wong says, have you seen Tech Syndicate's comparison with Intel? Videos from about 9 years ago. And unfortunately, Dr. Huang believed it and got an 8350 and then got a 2500K a few years after that, and wow, so much better. There was a lot of copium, unfortunately, among AMD's fan base. I was a longtime AMD fan, and I saw the FX architecture. I was like, how do you guys think this is good? You're doing exactly what you're doing exactly what Intel did when you kicked their butts for years. Why do you think you're going to be able to do this better? And a lot of the architecture, I think, was they were still, for some reason, thinking that they could scale this thing, that it would be easy to get from 32 nanometers down to who knows what, and go faster, Dennard scaling, right? And that was right at the time when Dennard scaling just fell apart. We couldn't get past, for global foundries, couldn't get past 32 nanometers. Intel didn't have a problem, but got stuck at 14. That was, it was a bad time to be designing a CPU architecture where your scaling is based entirely on your node shrinks. And yeah, they really did not read the leaves, the tea leaves, very correctly with that one. They really didn't. Oh, good. I got Klarjan to generate a SHA-1 hash. Good. Excellent. That's good. All right. Let's hop onto this machine here and run some games and see what we've got. Hey, hey. Ta-da! So here we go. We've got an 8120. It's doing its thing. Sorry about the resolution. I've got everything at 1080p. High refresh rate going into my capture card to try and make things a little easier on myself when I'm playing the games. It gives me a couple of more frames worth of reaction time. Anyway, here's our 8120. We've got our 8 logical cores. And I'll run some CPUs in here. If I change the scaling now to make it easier for y'all to see, apologize. It's gonna really mess with our results, because of course every game you try and play will also try and scale itself by your display scaling factor, because Windows is an amazing operating system that functions very well. So here we've got our FX 8120. Yeah, we boost up to 4 gigahertz, 8 megs of level 3 cache. Not a whole lot to say here. It's the Zambezi, which I believe is Pile Driver. No, is 8120 should be original Bulldozer, I think. Who cares? They're all the same speed. They're all freaking slow. They made 4 revisions of this architecture, and every single revision was god-awful slow. Anyway, the first thing that I did, just to verify that we do get better performance, is I ran Geekbench on the 6300 and the 8120. So here's the FX 6300, 591 for single core score. Remember, we're boosting up to 4.1 gigahertz on that. We get a 540 single core score on the 8120. But of course, our multi-core score is higher, 2199 versus 2419. Still, not a lot between the two of them. And this was why, back in the day, everyone recommended just get the 6-core, because there's not that much in it with the 8-core. So that's our first look. What we're probably going to look at once we get into the 4200, excuse me, once we get into the 4200, is down here at multi-core performance, looking at the floating point subscore, because that's probably going to give us the scaling that we're looking at. Since we're going to have, we're going to have a 4-core FX CPU that actually has all 4 of its floating point units enabled. So in this case, it is 2149 for the for the 6-core with 3 floating point units. And that is 2316 for the 8-core with 4 floating point units. So I would expect the 4100 or the 4200 to land somewhere between these two results, right? So I guess that's going to be the first thing we do once we switch over to the 4200. So let's run. Do I have any results for? Check my. I have a notepad with results from yesterday. Okay, I've got notes for Redout 2, Starfield, and BeamNG Drive for the 6300. So let's run through those real quick here and see what we can get. Redout should be really interesting. I don't think it actually uses all 3, or no, it does. It totally does, that's right. You see 50% utilization on the 6300, and it's like, no, it's using all 3 of the floating point units. Because that would be 3 of the 6 cores, right? 3 of the 6 cores. I hate the FX architecture. God, I hate it so much. What do you mean install? You're installed at Plainu yesterday. Okay, hang on. What's going on with my Steam install? Oh, nice. It's lost the other SSD. Hang on. This is great. Going great. Going great. Why has it lost the other SSD? Incredible. Good. That's the boot SSD. This is the game's SSD. What's the problem? Alright, there we go. See, it sees it. Okay. Was using this thing last night. And you know what the first thing that happened when I started up right before stream today? Like 20 minutes before stream, I turn it on, get everything ready to go. It starts doing updates. And I'm like, really? You had all day yesterday to do updates, and updates don't drop on Saturdays. They drop on Tuesdays. What were you doing? By the way, like and subscribe if you like to torture old technology. See if it sees this drive now. We have 2 SSDs. Now it sees it. Okay, you know what? Fine. Fine. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Let's try that again. Chris Dugatti is here. Hello, welcome to the stream. Chris Dugatti says, I used to have an FX 6300 back in the day. It was okay for usual tasks, but not demanding gaming. Yeah, no, we're gonna run a demanding game on it today. We're gonna run Starfield on it. I remember when we did this, right after Starfield launched. I think we ran it on one of my APUs, and I feel like I was surprised by how well it ran. Like I said, I tested some stuff last night. Things have gotten worse since launch, because we only got 16 FPS in Starfield last night on the 6300. I shudder to think what the 4200 is going to do with its 4 cores, but I guess we'll see. Alright, so what I've been doing for Redout 2, if you haven't seen Redout 2 before, this is a zero gravity racer. Kind of a dead genre, but fun. If you ever played F-Zero back in the day, or F-Zero X, or of course Wipeout on the PlayStation, that's what this is. If you happen to have or one of your one of your kiddos has a Switch and you've played Fast RMX, it's the same kind of idea. I'm kind of a fan. I like these. Hold it to start the game. I like these zero gravity racers. These are fun. It's kind of wild times. So what I've been doing with this one is I run this track with this car. I'm not particularly great at this game. This is about the 5th time I've played it, since I just ran some benchmarks on it last night. What I do is I'll finish a lap, because it's a time trial, so you do 1 lap as fast as you can. And what it'll do is it'll show up a score screen for you, and it autoplays itself. Let it complete a lap. It'll get all the stutters out of its system, because there's going to be stutters. And then take a look at the minimum and maximum frame rates. So last night on the 6300, my min frame rate was 56 FPS with a max frame rate of 112. We're at 1080p, ultra settings, borderless windowed, uncapped frame rate. It's a pretty easy to run game, but also I'm running it on a 3060, so we have plenty of GPU overhead. That's not going to be our problem today. Don't buy a 3060 for your FX CPU. It's way too much GPU for it. But let's go ahead and run this track. I apologize in advance for my awful racing skills. I sort of remember how this track was last night. Oh, those stutters, though. Oh, boy. Come on, baby. See, we got, boost pads. There is also a boost button, which I'm going to use in a minute. Once I'm done with this twisty section. This is just a time attack, so it's just me, not racing against anyone. I can't imagine what this would look like trying to race against other racers. I think it would have a very bad time. Okay, we're just about coming up to the end of the lap, and then we're going to let it autoplay itself, and we'll take a performance measurement. There we go. So, not a personal best, so it says better luck next time. So if you don't get a PB, it doesn't care. It's a very harsh game. But we're going to let it run a lap here, and then we'll do a min-max frame rate catalog here. While it does this, I will make an FX 8120 result. Okay. So this runs 3.4 to 4.0 gigahertz. we doing? We're almost there. Okay. Oh, where's MSI Afterburner? Come on. Dang it, Afterburner. I did all of that. I didn't even bother to see if Afterburner was running. Okay, well, we're going to do this again. Sorry. I'm good at this. This is my job. Good lord. Yeah, start with Windows, you pile of garbage. Alright, well, we're going to erase that one more time. Lord. Good lord. Train is talking smack. There we go. Yeah, so I have this pumped into my capture card at 1080p 120. Because there's about a 3 or 4 frame delay between what gets rendered on the machine and what I see on the screen. So at 120, viewing on a 60 Hz monitor gives me a little bit more of a reaction time. So I can actually play the game. It doesn't mean I'm good at it, though. Let's try this again. Unbelievable. Oh, heck yeah. David Starbucks says, I'm setting up a Phenom 2 955 Black Edition with an HD 5770. It's my GOG machine. That sounds fantastic. Fantastic. Come on, baby. So you've got, as with a lot of these zero gravity racers, you've got obviously yaw control, left and right, as well as a strafe, left and right, and pitch control, which is useful not only for like landing those long jumps, but also for like, you know, coming down on like negative radius turns where you're going, or I guess hills. You're coming along hills, so you can pitch down, stay on the hill. Get these boosts. There we go. Don't want to go too fast on that one, or you will fly off the track. Oh no, like that. Yep. Mom's not good at the racing game. Don't laugh at me. Come on. You'll notice on that particular section, there's a missing guardrail. You can just drive off the track there and die if you want to. Samsung Sim says that's a lot of FPS for FX. Well, here's the thing: it's a pretty easy game to run. I don't know what its heritage is versus like Fast RMX. If you've ever played that on like Wii U or the Switch, it also runs quite nicely on some pretty lackluster hardware. But the graphics, despite looking fantastic, pretty easy to run. Also, I'm running an RTX 3060 in this thing, so we've got plenty of GPU horsepower. We're at no problems with the GPU. I think we're seeing what 54% GPU usage. No worries, plenty of GPU. All right, here's the lap. So there's a 57 FPS minimum. 80 max, 82, 90, 96, 51 minimum. Five. No, it's not lower than 51. There we go, that was lap. 51 and 96, so we did worse with the 8 core than we did with the 6 core. So our minimum frame rate went from 56 to 51 FPS. Our max frame rate went from 112 to 96 FPS. That's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. Again, most reviewers told you, skip the 8 core, just get the 6 core. It's just as good, and in some cases faster. This is apparently one of those cases. CPU utilization is, yeah, I saw a max of 70% there. So it's definitely trying to use the 8120. But that ain't great. That ain't great. Wow. So we're slower so far in our first one here. And it's probably, honestly, that has to do with the scores we saw in Geekbench with lower single core performance. Is that owing to Bulldozer versus Piledriver, or the clock speeds? It's only 100 megahertz difference, but maybe that matters. I don't know. Shockingly, though, the more cores you give FX, the slower it goes. I'm not super surprised. So the next one I want to try is Starfield. We'll fire that up here. So I was testing last night in the Mast district in New Atlantis, getting a whopping 16 frames per second on the medium preset with VSync off. Pretty bad. Medium preset sets 50% FSR as well, so definitely not a GPU bottleneck. Pickles here, hello. Nice. Pickle says my GOG XP machine is an i7 3770 with a 780 Ti. What a GPU. That 780 Ti is pretty great. All right, so let's load up a previous save. Are we loading Starfield? I think we're loading. Oh yeah, no, we're loading. Nice. Pickle says I had an ATI 5830 that came across the 780 on eBay for 40 bucks. That's not bad. It's not bad at all. It's actually loading. This is. Yeah, no, this is loading. It's just sitting here. Trina asks, what is a GOG? GOG is Good Old Games. GOG.com. Lets you pick up old games. Their modus operandi is to actually like preserve games so you can play them on modern systems. However, most of the time, that preservation comes in like a compatibility layer or like a bundled version of DOSBox, and you can just get, you buy the game, you can just pull the original game out of it and like run it on vintage hardware. I do it all the time actually. If I'm testing a video card and I'm like playing some games on it, good chance those games have come from GOG, and I just pulled the original game files out and stuck them on a vintage machine because it's pretty nice, pretty easy. Yes, they're all DRM free, and you don't need the CDs in the drives for any of them. It's really nice. Way more convenient than like actually using the original media from the games. Okay, we have loaded into Starfield, finally. It is dawn in the Mass District, and I mean, I guess that is technically more frames. 19 is more than 16, but geez, that is 83% CPU usage and a whopping 37, 40% GPU usage. The 3060 is using 50 watts right now. Unbelievable. This is. I swear when we ran this, like close to launch day, was it pre launch day? I think it may have been pre launch day because I accidentally got the deluxe edition. But we ran this on a Bulldozer APU, and I swear we got like 26 to 30 FPS in this area. I'd swear. Man, something has gone wrong. I mean, it's Starfield. Of course, something's gone wrong. It's Bethesda in 2024. They've forgotten how to make games. Well, there you go. 19 FPS. We are seeing better performance in Starfield. I'm curious to see what the 4200 does with this, because it definitely seems to be related to the number of floating point units. 19 FPS. Okay. The other one I have. Yes, Gut Bomb asks, is this on the 8120? It is. This is the 8120. Yeah. No, this is it's bad. Wait, I got 16 on the 6300 last night. 16. I swear we ran this on one of my FX APUs and we got like 26 FPS in this area. Like pre-launch day, but see what a few patches do to the game. Woof. David Starbucks says, still haven't bought a Star Rim. Yeah, I wouldn't bother. Honestly. It's not that great. And Bethesda keeps doubling down on all the wrong stuff. Fans keep telling them it's bad, and they keep saying, no, you're just playing it wrong. It's really awful. Oh, let's see. Did I do a cinnamon? Oh, yeah, no, I've got some CPU only benchmarks here in a minute. Last one I want to look at is BeamNG. BeamNG has a lovely little CPU benchmark built into it where it tries to simulate a number of D-series pickups all at the same time. Yeah. Yeah, Gutbomb says, I played it for a week on Game Pass and lost interest. Yeah, that's probably the best way to experience it, honestly. Oh, for sure. David Starbucks says, I still play Skyrim and Oblivion here and there. I still play Skyrim unabashedly. I love it. I love Skyrim. Um, I have 450, 500 hours into that game, and I'll fire it up and I'll find things that I didn't find before. That's without even like loading in all of the mods. Like there's so many content edition mods in Skyrim to just like, oh god, that talk about a perfect storm of a game. Jeez. I don't think Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be the same, sadly. So anyway, to do the benchmark here in Beam, if you don't know what Beam is the funny car crash game. You see like TikTok videos of people crashing cars into each other at high speed. You're like, how are you simulating that so accurately? Well, it's BeamNG. You go to the performance tab, Scroll down a bit. There's physics benchmark. That's what we're going to do. And it just simulates cars until, I don't even know what the limit is. I thought it was 32, but I had to kill it at 32 last night because it just kept going. It was bad. Stop. Okay, so we're already off to a bad start. Number of megabeams per second is lower right away. Please have a higher upper limit. God. We should see the numbers go up until we hit 8 cars because we have 8 threads on the CPU. But this is mostly just plain old x87 floating point math. So you can see we go up quite a lot until we hit 4 threads, and we start to increment a little less, right? We go up 5, 9, 6. What's 8 gonna be? That's gonna be, yeah, 4. And then you should see a drop off. At 9 cars, we're overloading the CPU. Yep, 63. So we went from 81 to 63. Yikes. Total throughput is higher. So with the 6300 last night, the maximum I got it to do was 72 million beams per second. So at 72 M beams. And that was with 6 cars or 12 cars. Because of, the second order harmonic at 12 threads on a 6-core processor. But only 6 cars was actually real time. So that second column, percent real T, that's percentage of real time rendering. If you're above 100%, good, you can actually run the game. You'll have some time left over to draw the graphics and everything else. This is just calculating the physics. If you're under 100%, sure, your CPU is doing it, but you're not actually running the game. You won't be able to do full 60 FPS. So, yeah, that's not great. That's not great. Total throughput is up from 72 to 81. But let's see, at 6 cars, oh, it's almost the same as far as real time. 6 cars, we get 71 megabeams on the 8120 here, and I got 72 megabeams on the 6300 for 123% real time, and this is 122% real time. Yikes! Yikes! Yeah, so this doesn't seem like a good deal. And again, the reviews back in the day said the same thing. Don't get the don't get the 8120. What's the MB number? 71.102. It's lower than 6300. Incredible. All right, I'm not going to write all these numbers down. I can run this test myself later if I'm curious, but this is yikes. This is yikes. That's what this is. This is yikes. All right, let me clear the rest of this graph out. I don't need the rest of it. Let's move on. Got some CPU tests. Yikes. Yikes, yikes. Oh, I want to record what we get for 4 cars as well. 57.244, because I think that's going to be relevant for the 4200 when we test it in a minute. 244, and that's how much percent real time? 147.51. Now, a modern Ryzen CPU runs this game like stink. I think my 5800X3D can do 32 cars above real time, something like that. It's ridiculous. So, yeah, definitely. Looks like this was designed for the 8120 at 105% real time with 8 cars on an 8 thread. Weird. Something I've noticed testing FX, right? Like, you run it in older game or in newer games, you're like, how is it doing as well as it's doing? And I think there's some old FX code paths still alive in a lot of engines out there. They're finally being used by me doing memes. Okay, so 3D Mark. I just ran Firestrike on this. That's all I'm going to do with this is run Firestrike. But Firestrike is a graphics card benchmark. Yes, it is. Unless your CPU is so slow that it holds back the graphics card. Which, guess what? Normally you run Firestrike, right? And your CPU is at like 12, 20% maybe? And you're maxing out your graphics card. Well, I mean, you'll see what what Afterburner says for the CPU usage on this. It's not 20%. What's going on in chat? John says, "Am I so out of touch?" No, it's the player base who's wrong. Yeah, exactly. It's a very Principal Skinner kind of an approach to it. All right, let's do none of these modern benchmarks. We're gonna run good old Fire Strike. Just the benchmarks, please. Thank you. David Starbuck. I lost 6 months of my life to Skyrim back in the day, and then I got bit by a vampire. Yeah, and if you don't know how to cure that, you're like, oh no, your whole game changes. Hope you have a save. The first time that I did the companions quest, I was like, oh, oh, oh. What do you mean everyone in the world hates me now? Oh crap. Spoilers for Skyrim, I guess, but if you haven't done the companions quests, go do them. They're good. Samsung Sim asks X87. Yes, X87 means basically plain old floating point code. There's no SSE. There's no what is it? What is it now? What is the? There's no MMX. There's no SSE4. There's no AVX. It's just plain old x87 floating point code. X87 means that, when you had the 286, it only did integer math. You'd have to slot in an Intel 8287 to get floating point math out of it. Same with the 386, you had to put in a 387 to get the floating point math. That's what I mean. X87, plain old floating point math. Probably there's not a lot of games that do it anymore. A lot of games need SSE. One of the flavors of SSE 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.1, 4.2. A couple of games nowadays are also coming out with like requirements for AVX support for math, which is just another like vector floating point math instruction set. But plain old x87 is it's just a little more old school, a little lower performance, but runs on everything. Very compatible. David Starbucks, it's time for haiku. chips and cheese or the Bulldozer article. I'll have to read that. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Yeah, exactly. David Starbucks says your RTX 3060 is barely idling. Yeah, basically. Basically. Hard-nailed says being a vampire is great. It's definitely a different playstyle. I never ended up doing the vampire playstyle through Morrowind, because Morrowind was the last big Elder Scrolls I played before Skyrim. I never really got into Oblivion. I got it, right away at launch, but it never hooked me the way that that Morrowind did. So I just kept playing Morrowind, just put more mods in it, because why not? And then Skyrim has been the same way now. I just pour more mods into it, and see what happens. All right, so the way that I do these, I don't look at any of these stupid scores up here. I always go down to the detailed scores in here and look at the frame rates, because that's way more comparable. That's data that you can use with your head, So when I tested the 6300, same setup, this exact same setup, RTX 3060, 1080p 120, or whatever resolution this ends up setting. I think it's 1024 by 768. But plugged into the capture card at 1080p 120, I got 95 FPS, 95.7 FPS in game test 1, or graphics test 1, and we're down again, 89.37 FPS. Yikes, 89.37. I didn't think we'd do worse with the 8-core. It's really bad. We're not as bad off with graphics test 2. The 6300 only did 86.92 FPS, so we're only down a quarter of a frame in this one, but we're still down 86.74. Also, the physics score somehow the physics score is up. Sorry, I was looking at the score instead of the test FPS. We got 17.3 FPS on the 6300, and we get 17.69 FPS on the 8120. What is going on with this thing? It's so bad. It is so bad. And then the combined tests were also down from 11.5 to 10.17. That's awful. Man, this is a dog. This CPU is awful. All right. So I did the Geekbench. I didn't record it. It's okay. I've got a shortcut to it on the desktop. So then the last thing we're going to do with the 8120 before we swap over, it's good. We're at an hour. Perfect. Last thing we're going to do is Cinebench. I shudder to think how long the Cinebench single core score is going to take. Oh boy. I kind of don't want to because I know it's going to take forever. I'm going to do the multi-core. I'll record that. Our single core score on Cinebench for the 6300 last night was 93. And we got 406 on multi-core. So let's see what this does. %, more cores. Yeah, exactly. I don't think I'm gonna run the single core on this. We'll just do the multi-core here. It shouldn't take super long. So I had what was it? I ran the one time that FX really surprised me with this performance was when I used it for virtualization. I ran, oh god, Zen. Anybody remember Zen Server from way back? The Citrix Zen Server. They either they open sourced it or it was based on an open source project. But you could get the open source version of the Zen Server hypervisor and run virtual machines, just like just like you could with VMware and vSphere, with a nice web interface and everything. It was great. Ran it for free, open source. Is great, wonderful. So that is multi-core score of 461, which is not a lot higher than 406, considering. Yikes. I'm going to skip single core score for now. We'll do that later. We're going to swap this over to the 4200. But the one time I was really impressed with FX was when I used it as a virtualization platform. It really surprised me with how quick it was and how well it was able to balance multiple virtual machines running at the same time. Honestly, like, and I wasn't using like an 8-core FX or anything. I was using a 2-module 4-thread APU, the Athlon 2 X4, the 860K. It's the the 4-core APU, but with with the integrated graphics removed. It was pretty good. I was surprised, and that's what I've heard from other people too. Is like FX really shined, in enterprise applications, so in Linux and running server stuff in Windows Server. But geez, it sure didn't do it any good in the home. All right, so I'm gonna swap over to the desk cam, and we're gonna swap CPUs. Scene switch, desk cam. Ta-da! All right, pretty easy. Push down CPU cooler, unlatch, and then move the CPU cooler to disengage. There it is. Wah! Disengage the thermal paste and not pull the CPU off of the socket. That's how that works. So here is our FX 4200. Will it focus? Super doesn't want to focus on this. It's the chip that doesn't exist. There it is, I swear it's real. FD4200. It's a real honest to gosh for FX 4200. Okay, let me grab a paper towel and get this goop off of everything. Nice purple. We're in for a fun time when I'm de-gooping things. And Moxon says, I still have my Cinebench R15 scores saved from an FX. 575 points with an FX 6300. Nice! Got a decent overclock on it. There we go. Hello. Yeah, I'm just like, yeah, well, let's just go ahead and clean this thing. Let's get started. And then the whole screen goes blue. System service exception. Like, really? In the middle of a stream. God, I hate this operating system. Unbelievable. Well, we made it back. Sorry about that. Windows just decided to blue screen for no apparent reason. Uh, I don't know what a system service exception is, but it sounds like it's a Windows problem. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that it's a Windows problem. Oh, system service exception. Windows, that sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. Oh my gosh. System service exception. Carthor says, no way, Windows never BSODs. I was surprised. It hasn't BSOD'd on me in a long time. And then in the middle of this stream, just really. PC Sound Legacy's here. Hello, Ernie. How's it going? How is it going? We are doing horrible things to FX processors. Well, sorta. Chris Ducati says, sounds like a Windows Me error. Exactly. So if you missed the gist of it, Ernie, I found this processor thanks to some folks on the Pixel Pipes Discord. This is an FX 4200, which if you look at the page of, maybe it's changed now, I don't know if somebody here has edited the Wikipedia article, but if you look at the Wikipedia page for FX CPUs, it doesn't exist. Supposedly, there's 50 samples of this on the Passmark database. Supposedly, this is a 4-module, 4-thread FX CPU. Not a 2-module 4-thread, a 4-module 4-thread. So it's an 8-core FX CPU that's had its integer units cut instead of just cutting the modules. So like it has all 4 of its floating point units are intact, supposedly. So we're going to find out. We just did some testing with an actual 8-core FX chip, an 8120, which was disappointing because it's FX. Now we're going to try the 4200 and see if it's any less disappointing. I imagine it won't be, but I'm hoping it's at least surprising. I have heatsink goop all over me. You also missed my streaming computer just blue screen in the middle of a stream with a Windows error, a Windows service exception. I don't know what that is. It wasn't like a hardware bug check or anything. It just Windows service exception. So sounds like a you problem, Windows. Sorry. I don't know why you stopped my computer for your problem, but okay. Sure. Get some of this goop off of this processor so I don't get it on my hands every time I pick it up. Heatsink goop is the worst. Alright. Let's put a heatsink on this and fire this thing up. See what we get. Some replacement heatsink goop. The lapping on the bottom of this heatsink is not the best. You can literally feel the ridges from the CNC tool. It's not what I'd call the best surface finish. Okay. On there. And press down. Ding. You're on and ready, hopefully. This BIOS recognizes this thing. I'm going to switch over to the capture card. And away we go. That's a good sign. Like and subscribe. Oh, there we go. Well, would you look at that? Even Task Manager has changed its tune a little. I don't know if y'all can see that. 4 cores, 4 logical processors. You remember what we saw with the 8120? 4 cores, 8 logical processors. Is this actually the mythical 4 real cores? Well then, this should be very interesting. Let's run CPU-Z and see what we have for a max boost clock. Yes, Ernie. Ernie's like, RTX card will be bored. Yes. I think the most we've seen the 3060 do is about 50% utilization. Yeah. So, and that I think that was in Redout doing like 100 FPS. So yeah, no, it's definitely asleep at the wheel here. So this boost clock is the lowest we've seen yet tonight. Max multiplier of 19.5, so that's going to be like 3,900 megahertz. Interesting. It also says it's Zambezi, so this could just be an 8120 with 4 of its integer units turned off. Yeah, look at the TDP, it's 125 watts. It's got the full TDP of the 8 core. This is really weird. Huh. Well, let's do a quick Geekbench. So pull up the 6300, and I'll pull up the 8120, and then let's minimize these. Make sure everything is settled. Yes. Okay, Windows is Jeff doing things, so let's run Geekbench. Let's see what it does. I'm very curious to see what the floating point score is. So the difference with this one, Ernie, is most 4-core FX processors, right? Because you have, the FX was built, with 2 integer units, and then there's a shared floating point unit, right? And that's a module. That whole chunk, right? You have the 2 integer units and the floating point unit. That's a module. So you have module for 4 cores, right? You have 4 integer units, 2 floating point units. That's a 4-core FX processor, right? If you get 4 modules, that's 4 floating point units and 8 integer units for 8 cores. Normally, or the way I thought AMD only ever did this was if they needed to make a smaller FX processor, right? They'd take an 8-core and slice off one of the modules, right? And then you get a 6-core, 3 modules, 6 thread. Or I think they had a second die, which was just 2 modules for 4 threads. I thought that was how they just did these. But this CPU, apparently, is a full 4-module, 8-core FX processor, but they've disabled 1 integer pipeline on every module. So we have 4 integer pipelines and 4 floating point units, which should mean it's faster than most of the 4-core FX processors. And in floating point, it should be basically the same as the 8-core. Since we've got all 4 floating point units running, we're not missing any level 3 cache. It's got the full 8 megs of level 3 cache. It's got all the full level 2 cache. Like, this shouldn't be slower. Like, maybe, obviously integer is going to be slower in multi-core, but like, this is very interesting. GUC fan says, wait, FX 8120 is 4 cores and 8 threads, even though everything online suggests it's 8 cores and 8 threads. It's as I described it. The way AMD FX worked was AMD wanted to make an easy-to-produce processor made up of modular parts, so they could just replicate modules and make tons of cores. And they did that for the Opteron lines. I have a dual-core Opteron board right over there, but I don't have any Opterons I can show you. Where they would take these things and they just spam modules for the most cores they can possibly make. But it's really simple. You just replicate each module. Each module is self-contained. You've got a slice of level 2 cache, you've got a slice of level 3 cache. Or you don't, not a slice of level 3 cache, but you have the level 3 cache controller in there that can communicate with shared level 3 cache. But you get your level 1 cache, your level 2 cache, your 2 integer cores, 2 integer units, and then a shared floating point unit. And that's 1 module, right? In FX, it's 1 module. And AMD called these 2 cores. Each module was 2 cores because it had 2 independent integer units that could be addressed by the OS as 2 separate logical cores. Now, they got sued over this because of the shared floating point unit, because every other CPU core up until that point, you got 1 integer unit and you got 1 floating point unit per core. Okay, so what do we got here? Normally, when you make a quote-unquote 4-core FX processor, right, it's 2 modules. So you have 4 integer units and then 2 floating point units. Same with like the 6300, the 6-core. It's 3 modules. You have 6 integer units and then 3 floating point units. But because of those, because you only have the 3 floating point units, now in the modern day, we call it, 3 cores, 6 threads, because it's kind of more similar to hyper-threading or simultaneous multi-threading than it ever was to like actual physical cores in the CPU. It's not the same as either hyper-threading or SMT, but it sort of behaves similarly because you have shared resources in the CPU. So FX 6300, single core score of 591, FX 8120, single score of 540. FX 4200, single core score of 524. That's actually what I would expect, because our boost clock is 100 megahertz lower than the 8120, which is 100 megahertz lower than the 6300, and one architecture behind. Multi-core score similarly is down, also what I would expect, because this is the aggregate multi-core score. Now let's look at the multi-core floating point score. That's what I want to see. So here's the 6300. It gets basically a 2150 in multi-core floating point. The 8120 multi-core floating point is higher, 2316. That's what we'd expect. Now, what does the 4-core with 4 floating point units get? Oh, it's not as good. So that's what I would expect for a 2-module 4-thread, is 1562. That's exactly what I would expect for a 2-module 4-thread FX processor. So that's very interesting. That is suggesting that this is actually just a 2-module 4-thread CPU. Could be a fake. Could be that this is just a difference in scheduling, right? Like the CPU has to tell the OS its internal topology, right? It does this through the APIC. I forget what APIC stands for, but it's when the system boots up, the APIC basically says, all right, here's how many CPUs I have. Here's how many cores. Here's their layout if we have any non-uniform cores, so any NUMA nodes. And then the OS, it's the OS's job to schedule threads on those cores and interpret them that way. So I wonder if this is just a 2-module 4-thread FX CPU, but it's reporting a different number of cores to the OS than it usually does to like get some different scheduling. Maybe. I don't know. That floating point score is exactly what I would expect out of a 2-module 4-thread Bulldozer CPU. 100%. It's exactly what I would expect out of it. So that's interesting. That's very interesting. I would expect to see similar. I'm going to run Cinebench real quick here. Just the multi-core. I'd expect to see similarly like half the performance that we saw out of the 8120. GUC fan says, I never upgraded from Phenom 2 to FX. It's probably worthwhile, yeah. Ran that Phenom 2 up until last year when I upgraded to Ryzen 5 5th gen. Not bad. Not bad. What am I trying to say? The late Phenoms, the Phenom 2 X4s and X6s were pretty darn competitive, especially if you got the ones that had higher clocks. 3 gigahertz, 3.2, very competitive with Intel CPUs at the time. It wasn't until they brought out, Nehalem and Westmere that performance started to lag behind. They were great with Core 2 versus Core 2. Nice. Yeah, the Phenom 2 X6 1055T is very popular. I mean, as popular as a CPU that cost that much could be, but it was a very popular CPU because it was, for a while, the fastest desktop processor you could get. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, K10 was developed pretty early. Intel kept pushing new instruction sets, right? And that was how they tried to keep themselves relevant. Fortunately, those new instruction sets haven't turned out to be as essential as everybody thought they were going to be up until recently, which is kind of cool. Nice. Overclocked to 3.5 gigahertz. Yeah, that would be a pretty potent CPU. That would be a pretty potent CPU. Yeah, so this is behaving more or less like I would expect a two module 4-thread. Yeah, we've got what 286. I think that is exactly half of what we got off of the 8120. Double check my notes. Oh right, my notes closed because my computer blue screened. Windows. Ah, what did we get? We got a 461. Yeah, it's almost exactly half. Like almost perfectly half. 286 to 461. It's a little above half, right? Because 286 doubled would be what, 560 something. So we're a little above half of what we got on the 8120. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think this actually has 4 floating point units in it. It certainly isn't acting like it has 4 floating point units in it. Unless it's no, because the boost clock performance, like, so FX CPUs have a weird boost algorithm, right? They'll have, if you're using one, I think it's 25% of the cores, it hits the top boost clock. If you're using 50% of the cores, it hits the second boost clock, and then anything above that, it's at the base clock, I think. Maybe that's just the Opterons. But since this has, 4 threads exposed to the CPU or to the operating system, loading down all 4 floating point units would make it run at its base clock instead of the 8120, where if you loaded down 4 floating point threads, you'd be running at 50% utilization, so it would run at its stage 1 boost clock. I don't think that wouldn't give you 200 points in Cinebench, I don't think. That wouldn't like almost double your score in Cinebench. It's like another 300 megahertz, maybe 10% more clock. I don't know. I don't think this is the fabled. This is not the fabled 4 module 4 thread that I think people are thinking of. It's kind of interesting. Nice, nice. We got some folks in here tonight. Arjan, thank you for the super chat. Oh no. Arjan back with another cursed fact. First floppy disk was released closer to World War I than to today. Thank you. I did not need to know that. Ah. Samsung Zip asks, how can they fake a CPU? That's a great question. I don't know how you would fake a CPU. A motherboard is easier to do because you can just change the BIOS on it. Same with a video card. So you get all the fake video cards. You just change the VBIOS on them. There is, microcode and firmware inside the CPU, but it's not super accessible. My guess is that this is a 2-module 4-thread Bulldozer CPU, and it just reports a different topology to the OS than what we usually see in a Bulldozer CPU. Normally we see, like, when you open up Task Manager, it shows two cores, 4 logical threads. This is saying 4 cores, 4 logical threads. I think it's just reporting a different topology to the OS. I don't think it's actually 4 floating point units. Unfortunately. Which makes sense, honestly. One, why would you ever do that, right? Like, why would you... The amount of work it would take, you would either have to disable the integer units in, like, the microcode burned into the CPU, right? When you burn the microcode into the CPU ROM, disabling half of the integer units in the CPU. Excuse me. It's dusty in here. Or you'd have to, like, precision fuse off those integer units so that they weren't part of the pipeline. Why would you ever do it? Why? Especially if you're disabling them from a software standpoint, right? There's no reason to. The four core CPUs were not in huge demand. Everyone was buying the 6 and the 8 core versions. If you have a perfectly functional, 8 core CPU, just sell it as an 8 core. You make more money. It doesn't make any sense to do this. I wish there was a way that I had to, like, examine the die on this thing, because I don't have any equipment to do that. But I will bet you it's a normal, maybe it is a whole, Zambezi die. Maybe it is the full 4 modules. But I think 2 of them have been disabled, just like you'd expect. 2 modules disabled. So 4 threads, 4 cores disabled. And we've got 2 modules, 4 integer units, 2 floating point units. It's just reporting a different topology to the OS. I think that's all that's happening here. I don't think this is anything groundbreaking, which is unfortunate. Let's see how it does in games. Let's just run a couple of quick games on it. I want to see how it does in Starfield, and I want to see how it does in Redout, because Redout is really easy to run. And this should tell us right away how many floating point units we have. David Starbucks says, that CPU is a liar. Exactly. I think it might... Maybe this was an attempt, because if you remember way back when FX launched, once again, as with Windows 11 and Zen 4 and Zen 5, Windows had trouble scheduling stuff on FX, right? Like it had problems scheduling this heterogeneous architecture, sort of, where you had this shared floating point units. So maybe this was a way to try and, like, trick Windows Scheduler. Maybe this chip makes more sense to plop into a machine that's going to be running Windows XP, where Windows XP just says, oh yeah, we have four cores, we'll just use the 4 cores. I don't know. No idea. I'm going to do the same thing that I did last time, which is we'll take the first ship, Lunaire. We're on Mars Orbiter. For the track, I'm going to race 1 lap and then let it auto race itself, and we'll measure the minimum and maximum frames. Oh, did I forget to turn on MSI Afterburn again? I don't think let me... I sure did. I thought I told it to start up with Windows. I swear I told it to start up with Windows. Afterburner! Yeah, see? It should start with Windows. Maybe I have to do it in the settings. Oh yeah, there you go. No, start with Windows isn't turned on. Thanks. Garbage. Okay, let's try it again. Good lord. GUC fan says that GPU is going to be so bored. You are 100% correct. Come on. Let's, okay. Shift F11. There you go. There we go. That's better. Okay. So, Mars Memorial Orbiter swap ship. We'll go to the first one. We'll run one lap and let it auto-race itself and see what we get for frames. I think this is probably going to be stutter fast. That's my guess. I mean, the 6 core was stutter fast. The 8 core was pretty smooth, but I imagine this is going to be pretty bad. Oh, if I can actually race. No guarantees on my driving skill. I'm not very good at this game. I'm running it because it's graphically very easy to run. Should mostly be a CPU benchmark. I don't have to race this lap well, I just need to complete it so that it auto-plays itself. But you know, there's still my pride. Oh god, please stick the landing. Oh god. Oh, nope. Didn't stick the landing. My pride is extremely wounded. Turns out your nerdy computer mom's not a great gamer. There's a trick to this game and I haven't figured it out yet. That's my problem. Okay, so let's let this thing autoplay itself and see what it gets for frame rates. So I'm gonna let it do a lap so it gets all the caching out of its system. CPU use is at 89 to 99%. We're definitely hammering on that 4200. Frame rates are looking okay though. Oh, that was a low of 40, so that's definitely worse. So we're going to be coming up to the lap marker here. We'll let it run the lap, and we're looking for lowest FPS and highest FPS. So far 58 and 77, 78, 80, 92, 96, 99, 40, 40 and 99, touched 48 there for a second, but it wasn't 40. 39, 37. 37. And what did I say? 90, 95? Definitely lower. So far, the fastest in Redout has been the 6300, which again, reviewers at the time said, just get the 6 core. Make another document here. So 6300 in Redout, we got 56 minimum, 112 max on the 8120, we got 51 minimum, 96 max. And on the 4200, we got 37 minimum, and what was it, 95 max, I think? So interestingly, close to the max frame rate of the 8120, but way down on the minimums. Way, way down. So next, Starfield. We're going to really punish this thing. Heat coming out of the back is fine. It's no biggie. You see that CPU usage, though, in the task manager. Completely pegged the whole time. Which honestly would make sense if it's only got, if it actually has the 4 floating point units we think it has. Of course, all 4 cores would be pegged. Whereas if it has half of the floating point units, you would expect it to see like 50 to 60% utilization at maximum. You know? Readout was inconclusive. I mean, the lows were awful. The lows were catastrophic. But the maximum frame rate was pretty much in line with the 8120, which it shouldn't be. If it only has 2 floating point units, it shouldn't be even close. So that does lend credence. I don't know. I don't know. Starfield time. This is what we do here, GUC fan. We torture old hardware. We're looking for 100% CPU bottleneck. And honestly, in Starfield, we have 3060 so much more GPU than we need to bottleneck this CPU. So much more. Not even funny. Oh, have a good one, Opteron Prime. Heading to work. Weirdly, despite not changing the graphics card, we have to recalculate shaders. Okay, sure. Alright, Starfield. Sure thing. Alright, so we will. Yes. How long will it take to load? It took forever last time. Chris Fox says 15 FPS. Surprisingly, that's what we got on the 6300. We got 16 FPS on the 6300. We got 19 FPS on the 8120. Now, if we are actually half of an 8120, I would expect like 10, maybe 12 FPS. Right? Like 10, 11, 12 FPS. If we have 2 floating point units instead of 4, I'd expect us to go from 20 to 10 FPS. So I guess we'll see. It is loading. You just gotta give it a minute. This is how long it took on the other ones, too. Oh, these CPUs. So this is medium preset with VSync off and no film grain. Other than that, it's all the defaults, including 50% res scale. Like it needs it? It sure doesn't. It's the GPU's not the problem here. 100% not the problem. Love that loading time. Woo! Oh, Cloudjon also left the stream. I will see them later. Sure is taking a long time to load. Maybe we will go at that 11 FPS. Oh boy. Well, that's not what I expected at all. I mean, for a second we saw 11 FPS, but now we're at 15. I guess that would make sense if this was a 2-core or a 2 FPU FX. Yeah, because we're under the 6300. I would really expect this to be pretty much exactly half the 8120. Not like 1 frame per second away from the 6300. Doesn't make any sense. Hmm. There's a couple of things I can think of that this is, that what we're seeing here, right? Because I would expect this to be like literally 11 or 12 FPS. We got 19 out of the 8120, right? This runs 100 megahertz slower, has half of the cores. It should give us like literally half of the frame rate, right? But it's not. We're down 4 FPS. We're within spitting distance of the 6300, which has proven itself to be a faster gaming processor in every single test we've run. That 3-module, 6-thread FX processor has been the top spot for every test we've done in here, and this thing is within spitting distance of it. Yeah, so we got 16 FPS on the 6300, 19 FPS on the 8120. We get 15 FPS on the 4200. I would expect this to be at like 10 or 11, maybe. So what I'm thinking we might be seeing is if this does have all 4 floating point units, and a lot of architectures around when this was designed if you wanted to run a floating point instruction, you had to send your instruction down the integer pipeline. It would get to a decoder that said, oh, actually, this is a floating point instruction. Let me shunt it over to the floating point unit. This was true with like the PowerPC 604 and 604E. It was true with K10. What was that? Was that Windows trying to murder this run? Now I just saw 16 FPS for just a moment. I don't think that was real. So what we might be seeing is because we only have one addressable integer pipeline per floating point unit, we can't execute any other integer code while we're sending something to the floating point unit, right? So we might have 4 floating point units, but we can't use all of them at the same time. And I don't know if this is how Bulldozer was designed. I don't know if it's K10 did this, where the primary floating or the primary integer unit with the complex integer unit was branched off and sent instructions over to the floating point unit. That was how it did how it handled floating point instructions. So you could pipeline a few simple integer instructions and then fill up the floating point unit because it had like what three simple integer units and then one complex integer unit that also shunted instructions over to the floating point unit. Now FX, I don't know if it's the same way. I think the integer units, each integer core, was simpler than K10. I don't think it had all 4 integer units per core. But I don't know if it needed those integer units to also send instructions to the floating point unit. I don't know. If that's the case, that might be what we're seeing. We're seeing a bottleneck in the integer units to try and get floating point math down to the floating point units, which is why we're seeing performance that's honestly pretty close to having 3 floating point units instead of 2. But we're not seeing anywhere near what we should be seeing with 4 floating point units on this architecture. I don't know. That's pure speculation. This CPU is confusing. I keep running tests on it, and it keeps generating more questions and fewer answers. The Geekbench scores were like definitive. We got half the score in the floating point that we got off the 8120. It's like very clear. Nope, you have 2 floating point units. That's it. And then, read out, we got the same maximum frame rate that we got on the 8 core, which we shouldn't have. Not even close. There's no possible way we should have gotten the same maximum frame rate. This CPU is weird. Like, weird. And maybe this is what AMD saw while they were designing this. They're like, we're starving the floating point units by only having 1 integer pipeline or 1 integer core per floating point unit. And that's why they did this weird module thing. I don't know. This is very, very interesting. And there's a lot of questions that I have that I don't have answers for. I have one more test that I can run, though. We can feed it some pure x87 floating point math via BeamNG drive. We'll run the performance test on it, see how many megabeams per second we can get it to do. John, I'm gonna have to look that article up because I am really curious. This doesn't make any sense at all. Jeez. Okay, so once again, we go into Options, down to Performance, and scroll down to the Physics Benchmark. Windows is doing stuff in the back. What are you doing, Windows? What are you doing? Windows says, never mind, I'm not doing anything. Don't worry about it. Okay, we'll run the Physics Benchmark. See what we get. Chris Fox says 40 FPS. So this is going to do mega beams per second, and the first one is exactly the same as what we got out of the 8120. That's interesting. I wish I'd written down more results from the 8120 than I did. Four is pretty much identical, 57.244, and this is 57.653. There's our thread drop off, right? So we just went to 5 threads and we dropped off, which makes sense. We're overloading the CPU. But all the way up to 4 cores, the 4 threads, we saw that's exactly the same scaling that we saw with the 8 core. Maybe this does have 4 floating point units and it just can't feed them all. That is so weird. Michael Harbach says, so if a 6-core chip was scaled back, so you have to remember, you have to think about these in modules, right? So each Bulldozer module it's shaped like a Y, or like a tuning fork. You've got 2 integer pipelines, or 2 integer units, which themselves have 3 integer pipelines each, and they funnel into a single shared floating point unit that also does the MMX, and it does the SSE, and it does the AVX. It does all the vector math. Normally, if you want to take like a 4-module design, right? That would be like a full Zambezi core, right? So you have 4 modules for 8 cores with 4 floating point units. Normally, you just you'd lop off 2 of those modules and you get a 4-core. That was what they did with the APUs, right? Like they took 2 of the modules, plunked them in, didn't put any level 3 cache in, because these also will have level 3 cache, and the rest of the space on the die they used for integrated graphics, for Terascale first and then for GCN. The 6-core was similar. You'd have your 4-module Zambezi, your full-size die. You'd whack off one of the modules, so you'd lose 2 cores, and you'd have 6 cores with 3 floating point units. Like that's the 6300. This thing supposedly, and I think I'm believing it more now. I think the workload in Geekbench 5 might be a little weird. Geekbench 5 might see an FX processor and assume that it's got 2 integer cores and a floating point core per module. And when it gets this, when it's given this architecture, it doesn't know what to do with it. Because the numbers we just got from Beam are, I kid you not, identical for the first 4 threads, identical to the 8120. And this is just floating point math. Beam just does floating point math. It's nothing special. If we only had 2 floating point units, you know, I don't think we would see this kind of scaling from the first 4 threads. I don't think we'd see it at all. I think I'm gonna have to buy another 4-core FX processor just to double check this, because this is driving me kind of insane. What is going on with this processor? It's so weird. Because like the Cinebench numbers were exactly what you'd expect for a 2-module 4-thread. And yet the games, Redout and Starfield, neither of them made sense as a 2-module 4-thread. And Beam didn't make sense as a 2-module 4-thread. You'd see less close scaling if this were actually 2-module with 2 floating point units. In the Beam testing, you would see the same numbers for the first 2 threads as the full Zambezi dies, the 8120, and then you'd see a sharp drop off, diminishing returns for thread 3 and thread 4, and then you'd see the collapse where we go under real time because we're over 4 threads on FX, and FX can't handle that. But we didn't see that. We saw identical scaling for the first 4 threads, and then it just fell right on its face because it ran out of threads, which makes me think it does have 4 floating point units, and they're being bottlenecked by only having 1 integer unit per. Almost like AMD knew what they were doing when they were designing this architecture. Crap. Shoot. Well, this has just posed more questions than answers, honestly. This has been really interesting. I guess watch this space. I'm going to come back with another FX CPU. I have a couple of APUs that are 2-module 4-thread, but like I said, those don't have level 3 cache, so you can't really compare them with the full fat desktop Zambezi and Vishera dies because they're missing that level 3 cache. We will revisit this. These FX CPUs are like $10 a piece, so I'll just grab another one, and I'll get one that is known to be 2-module 4-thread, as a typical FX CPU would be. And we'll see what we get for performance results. Because this doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make any sense at all. Oh. So, I'm going to turn this thing off and we'll play you out. Because I think that's going to be it for today. Honestly, this has answered no questions of mine. 0. It's just given me more questions. What on earth? Oh. That's true. Ifrit says on Linux you can use LSTopo to show the topology of the CPU. Now the thing is, I don't know if LSTopo just asks the APIC, right? Like I said, that the APIC initializes, you know, the topology of the system, but it just trusts that based on what the CPU reports. And if this CPU is reporting a different topology than it actually is to like try and mess with performance numbers, I don't know. Would it just show you the same thing? 4 cores, 4 threads? What I think we could probably do is, I don't own the correct version of, I think it's IDA64, that'll do the level 2 cache latency testing, because that should show you the real topology of the CPU. When you try testing moving things from one part of the cache to the other across cores, because that should show you, like, it'll show you your boundaries of your level 1 and level 2 cache and your level 3 cache, how many CPUs can talk to the level 3 cache. So I don't know. Pancake is here. Hello, Pancake. You've arrived at the end of the stream. I apologize, but I just got done testing the FX 4200, and it's just raised more questions because it didn't do anything I expected it to do. It did function, but like it literally did not do the things I expected it to do. It was neither close to the 8120 in performance, nor was it half the 8120's performance. It was very strange. And I think I'm going to pick up like a 4120 that is known to be a 2-module 4-thread FX processor, and we're going to compare it and see what happens. Hopefully that will shed some real light on this. But I think my hunch right now is that it is actually, for whatever reason, a 4-module 4-thread FX processor, and those integer pipelines, those integer cores, are important for feeding the floating point unit. I'd have to look back at the block diagram because I don't remember if you can schedule floating point and integer separately, or if you have to go through the integer unit to get to the floating point unit, like you did with K10. If that's the case, then that would explain what we're seeing, where sometimes it will go exactly as fast as the 8-core processor in floating point tasks, and sometimes it will go half the speed because it's running into this 4-thread bottleneck. So I don't know. It's Trina has managed to stay awake. Trina says, "Thanks for the strange and confusing stream." You're welcome. I am also extremely confused by this strange and confusing processor. It's very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. John says each FPU can be fed by 2 integer units. Yeah, I'm just looking for the specifics. Because like specifically K10, it's got 4 integer pipelines per core, 1 complex, 3 simple. The complex integer pipeline, you get a couple of stages in, and it says, oh, this is actually a floating point instruction, and it is responsible for shunting that instruction to the floating point unit, which ends up blocking that pipe for as long as it takes that instruction to get over to the floating point unit. I'm pretty sure they pipelined it that much on K10. You go back in time to like the 486, and the entire integer pipeline would block, waiting for the floating point unit, to receive its instruction. That was the big thing that the Pentium did. If you remember, the Pentium's got a pipeline to FPU. Yes, it means you can actually send an instruction down the complex integer pipeline, because the Pentium now had 2 integer units, a complex and a simple, and it would just shove it off to the floating point unit, and it only take a couple of cycles to do it, and then it was free to do more work on the integer pipeline, while the floating point pipeline did its thing separately. It was pipelined, super pipelined. But that was, through the evolution of CPUs from the Pentium to like Pentium Pro, PowerPC 604, 601, 604, the K8, K10, they're all really interestingly similar in how they were designed, where they have this complex integer pipeline, and you have to feed your floating point instruction into that pipeline and have it send the instruction to the floating point unit before it'll execute. It's very strange. I'm sure there's very good historical reasons for doing that. But I think this might be what we're running into with this FX 4200 that might still be there in the architecture. I have to take a look. So so I'm not actually that familiar with FX's architecture. So anyway, yeah, without a second integer core, we would be blocking the whole CPU. If we try and fill up, all 4 floating point units, now we can't run any integer instructions till floating point units finish. So we can't really utilize all 4 floating point units. Anyway, excuse me, it's dry in here. I think that's going to be it for stream today. I hope everybody had fun and maybe learned something. I don't know. I don't know if I learned anything today, but I certainly experienced something. We will revisit this topic. I'm going to go pick up a cheap 2-module 4-thread FX CPU, and we'll see how that does in the benchmarks at some point in the future. Next week is going to be return to the thin clients as home theater PCs. Both of my replacement home theater PC thin clients arrived this week, so we're taking a look at those, see how they perform in home theater PC tasks, including more jank embedded Bulldozer, which is gonna suck, I'm sure, but I'm sure it'll be funny too. Versus Intel Gemini Lake. So the Atom CPUs that were around in the Kaby Lake generation. So like UHD 600 graphics and what would have been E-cores if E-cores existed at that time. Should be interesting. I think honestly, Gemini Lake's probably going to win for like doing home theater PC tasks because it's got a really good implementation of QuickSync. But I think it'd be funny to run some games on the embedded Bulldozer because it just would be. I think it's like a 25-watt 2-module Bulldozer. It should be really funny. Anyway, before I cough my lungs up here with this dryness, hope everybody has a good rest of your night, and I hope the PC parts are ever in your favor. Have a good one, and I will see you next week.